bit is to check that someone online can hear us. If you could confirm with a thumbs up so that we know that you can hear sufficiently online. Oh. I know. Andrew Hedges, thank you, Andrew, for putting this one up. So he's there for us. Okay. So the agenda pack and papers have been published as via mod.gov and are directly available from the council's website from the link which was sent out to members. When I invite you to speak, because you clearly state in there who you are, and for the benefit of anybody who is listening to the meeting so that they can identify who is speaking and ensure that you use the microphone if you're in the room. Can I warmly welcome everyone, members of the public, media and members and officers joining us today. Just be advised that the meeting is being recorded by the council. Finally, as we now are using agendas electronically, could you please kindly, if you're making specific points, refer to the page in the published agenda so that we can all keep up with you and know where we're going. Just for housekeeping, we're not expecting any fire alarms. But should this happen, please follow Democratic Services colleagues and they will lead the way out of the room. Thank you. Item 1 of our agenda then is apologies for absence. And if there are apologies and substitutes, can we cover that at this point, please? What apologies are we aware of? Are you she? Microphone. Microphone.
We're aware of Councillor Nick O'Donnell.
Yeah, please.
Councillor Peter placed there, and I'm substituting for it.
Thank you. Are there any other apologies or substitutions?
Chair, if I could just say Councillor Heather Shearer is attending. She's been at a previous meeting on Peace and Crime Commission work.
Thank you. Okay, moving on then. Item 2 of our agenda, declarations of interest. This is the opportunity for members to make any declarations that are relevant to the current agenda items that are different from those already declared on their register of interests. Silence, that's what we like. Public question times. I'm not aware of any members of the public or public questions. So we move on. Item 4 of our agenda, which is going to be, bear with me because my schedule missed one. Yeah, so item 4 of our agenda, public question time. Item 5 is the DSG. Excellent. Sorry, bear with me. My agenda is slightly adrift. Bear with me a second then until I find mine. Thank you, Mr. Yeah, so item 4 of our agenda, I think, is going to be work programme. Just to let you know, so there was a pre-agenda meeting recently, which an officer-led meeting, which Evie and I snuck into. There were some conversations about the agenda. There is an agenda for the August meeting, which is subject to change, but I'm just asking for the committee to allow us the opportunity to continue the conversations. And what we'll do as soon as that agenda is done is that we'll publish it. And one of the things which I can say that will be on that agenda will be likelihood of how, depending on the debate today, we as a committee would be monitoring the DMP. So that goes, so that obviously that will help us an opportunity there, but that's the rationale for the agenda. And once again, as always, one of the things that the Vice Chair and myself have been doing is trying to manage the number of things that we're coming. There's a nice long list of things that we're willing to look at. And I think the Vice Chair and myself are looking to work with officers in a more proactive way so that we can get some agendas and work planning in place so that we know what the next few meetings agendas will be looking like. As always, what I will say is that obviously members and also officers that may be looking, there are eyes and ears. So if there are any topics or points that you think we should be looking at, please feel free to drop us an email at the earliest opportunity. Councillor Martin.
I know it's the right member to do it, Chair, but I was wondering if a matter of morale in local authority schools come up on the agenda at some point. I'm happy, I don't want to discuss it now, but I'm happy to contribute to compiling the agenda item, but I'd like to see it there somewhere.
Martin, that's the kind of suggestion we have. So as I've always said, the best thing to do to make sure that we don't forget or lose it is if you email me and Evie and perhaps Jamie or Ishi with the detail, we can then start adding that to the list of things, and we can then, if there are any questions, we can bring that back and work on that. Thank you. Okay, we're moving on then. Item 5 of our agenda, the main body of the meeting today. So I've had a conversation with the officers that are presenting. This is for those of you that have gone through the papers, thank you. It probably brings us lots of questions up, but the plan today will be to go through the PowerPoint presentation, covering each point. What I've agreed with the officers is when they get to an end of a section, before they go on to the next page, we'll ask questions on what we've seen beforehand. Otherwise, my concern will be that by the end of the PowerPoint, we're all either forgotten some questions or having to revert backwards and forwards. And I hope that, well, I have a fair list of questions, and I'm sure that you do too. But the purpose of today is obviously to understand what the plan is. So the deficit management plan, which is in place to cover or start looking at closing the designated schools grant gap, so that we can start moving forward. And some of the reason I asked Scott to send out a notice to all members yesterday, to remind me of this meeting, when we're talking of more than £100 million, this isn't a small decision. And it's something that we need to have due regard for, A, as a council, which I know the executive does, but B, as members, so that we understand what's going on. Because I think one of the things you'll find when we go through this plan is that this is just a starting point, and there are other steps that will be coming in as we go forward. So one of the things that we may, as a committee, want to make a recommendation for is that perhaps we recommend to executive that they may want to set up a special monitoring board of some sort. This is more than just children and family scrutiny. It affects finance and property and the way that we do this. And so there may be there, but again, that's one of the things we may want to consider. And please remember, members, the purpose of this committee is to make recommendations to executive. That's the bit that's important. So if you have a good idea, I can't always keep up with the recommendations. If you think it would make a recommendation for executive, then let us know, because hopefully between Evie, Ayushi, Scott and myself, we can keep up so that when we get to the end, we'll have an idea of what recommendations or what suggestions we might want to make. I'm pleased to say that, and say I thank officers for that. The paper that's in front of us today is likely to be pretty much the paper that goes to executive. And therefore, it gives us an opportunity that's why it's in places talks about executive and different things like that. So this is the paper that's so our opportunity to hopefully influence or make suggestions or recommendations about it now before it gets to executive. Thank you for bearing that in mind. My soft shoe shuffle was allowed the children's services, and I thank you for that. Okay, so without further ado, I'll pass over to Amelia. Could you introduce yourself and then go for the report? Thank you.
My name is Amelia Walker and I'm the Service Director for Education at Council. So I just want to start by setting a bit of context, and then Nicola and I would just like to take you through the slides. We have amended the slide pack.
Just hold. Sorry, Amelia, forgive me for it. So let's pause for a second, just to pause. And what we'll do is that Heather, do you want to come up here? Would that be the reason I'm stopping? Is if you want to, I'm just thinking that this is quite. What we'll do is well.
You can have that music, but it stops.
Sorry, if anyone online, it's just that we're just having. I know that Heather was held up at an important meeting with Santa, which I was aware of, and it obviously overruns. So.
I was hoping I could sneak in by the management.
So that's your role.
Yeah, so we just for a second and then we won't.
Pages there on the thing, so.
That's impressive. Thank you.
Just one other thing, the air conditioning in this room is poor, and I apologise for that, but we have one of those devil and the blue sea decisions, we can open the window on this side, but then you get the traffic noise. So if at any point anyone feels that they need to have a comfort break, they want to indicate, I'm happy to stop at an appropriate moment, so I recognise the fact that when I'm speaking, there's enough hot air coming out of my mouth without having anyone else to do so.
Can I second that, Mr. Chair?
If anyone needs a comfort break, I'm happy to just take a moment to feel, and in the same way, if you need to leave the room, then please feel free to do so as well. Amelia, I apologise for the interruption. Over to you again.
Thank you. I just want to just set the scene briefly, and then we'll take you through the slides. We have added just a few financial ones, so an opportunity just to look at those and look to take us through those. But as Lee said, just take your questions as we go, rather than wait at the end. This is very, very dense. There's a lot in it. One of the things I think is important to establish from the outset, and I know this is something that everyone around this table is very aware of, but this is about money, but a cheaper system is a better system for children, and a better system for children is a cheaper system. The money and the outcomes track together. It's very, very expensive to fail children, and that's our focus is always on them. But also just being very aware of what others are telling us about where we need to go. I'm aware that we had Ofsted and CQC with us last week. Speaking to the local ombudsman as well as colleagues up and down the country. And you'll see the reference to people too, external consultants who also advised us. I just want to thank the very many people who contributed to this. This committee for their patience and for putting this dedicated session on at the time that we were able to make work for the timelines. So we're very grateful for that, and thank you to Lee. And also just want to recognise the enormous amount of work that's happened across both teams, and there's a reason that this is a finance and education papers, because the finance team have worked tirelessly alongside us from the start to get it to this point, and will continue to be alongside us. But also just that this has come not out of from a darkened room, but from many conversations with parents, with colleagues, with schools and settings, including people on this table. As you go, and you'll have seen from the papers, this is an umbrella plan, so it includes things both that are already in train, that we hope to commence if the plan is agreed, but also things that will require more consideration. And as Lee indicated, we will be expecting to come back to this committee many times, because the issues are so complex, they will require individual decision making to come, and the rest of this year will be heavily focused on that, and you can see them at paragraph 6.1. We've aimed to create an accessible plan, so I hope, and your feedback on that we'd be very grateful for. But this is not easy stuff, but we have done our utmost to make it transparent to all. We are still in the process of, as Leah said, is finalising the executive paper, so there are some amendments that have been proposed to that paper, but obviously what you see here today would be updated with the recommendations of today's session. But any other comments that you have about the papers themselves are welcome. So without further ado, I can take you through the first few slides, and then I'll hand over to Nick. So I think it's really important to emphasise this plan does not stand in isolation. There is an existing SEND strategy. It's been in place for a few years, and that strategy was co-produced with parents, children, professionals, and we have absolutely stuck with the themes that have come from that co-production, and will continue to do so. Some very powerful messages that we've heard through that. But the plan has moved on from the original strategy, and if I can take you to the next slide, I usually. Sorry, I will at least, we just pause on each slide before I move on. If there's any questions?
I'll ask the question.
Please.
It's interesting. So the deficit management plan, so that this first slide, I think, yeah, it's linked to the SEND strategy. You made reference that it was put in place some years ago. I had a look and on our website, it seems to be, I think the most recent update was 2023, and the current strategy was 2023 to 2026. So the question, the bit that I was going to ask you talk. So is the plan different from the strategy? The first question.
So, and you've seen the strategy, the way that the original strategy was devised. It had high-level principles, organising principles that had come from co-production, and the rest of that strategy was actions to deliver on those high-level principles. Those actions are now outdated. So if the plan is agreed, that strategy will be updated to remove these outdated actions and to replace them with reference to this plan. The SEND action plan is a multi-agency plan. It's led not just by council members, but you can see as we go through, the NHS is heavily involved, so is the Parent Care Board and other providers, schools and professionals. So the strategy will be updated if this is agreed.
That's not point one, then that's not made clear here, because one of the things that confused me, that the statement you make is quite, the deficit management plan is linked to the SEND strategy. You just said the SEND strategy and the SEND action plan is out of date. So is the deficit management plan based on the previous SEND strategy or one that we're going to write in a minute?
So the SEND strategy is two elements. It has high-level principles and then it has actions. So the actions are being replaced, updated, because those are out of date. But the core element, the high-level principles, which you can see here, those will be retained because they were co-produced with parents and carers and children.
So do you have as a service, have a timeline for when the new SEND strategy will be put in place?
So I think the intention is simply to remove the actions and make reference to the plan, keeping essentially the first bit of the strategy, which is the high-level principles that come from children. So it will simply be trimmed to remove the outdated actions.
I don't want to start preempting that, but one of the recommendations that I would suggest that this bridge might consider is that the SEND strategy and the action plan be updated when it goes forward or at the earliest opportunity. And because for me, if 2022 to 2020, 23 to 26, we're playing, if the deficit management like that the MP is that important, we should have a SEND strategy that's in line with it. Obviously, I need to disagree. So, are there any members of questions? You just introduce yourself to the member.
So I'll go back to the coordinated member. So we discussed the SEND strategy during the SEND partnership board, and at that point, the recognition was that it should be reviewed. That's at that time, which when it was produced. And I also feel probably local authorities already taking this into consideration. We are due to have the review of the SEND, and the review white paper which will be released at some time in October, November time. And maybe that's a really good opportunity as well to then look at and review the strategy, and particularly in line with some of the proposals which are in the documentation which was sent to us, to reflect things like, for example, the expansion of the SEND provisions within our mainstream school settings. All those things that should be part of the new strategy.
Okay, thank you for your input. Just for members of the Swaffings are representative from education, then I believe you chair the schools forum, or you're
No, I'm not. I'm a
member of the schools forum. So that's our education link coming into the partners link coming into this. So thank you for that. So in effect, what we're saying, are we comfortable then that one of the first recommendations we may want to executive is that they try to bring together or produce a timeline that brings the SEND strategy in line with the MP? That I'm not seeing any objective with it. I know that's being negative, so thank you.
Move to the next slide, please. So this plan is a transformation plan. This is not about business as usual, and I think what has become clear to everyone working in the system is that we need to fundamentally change some aspects of how we educate children. And the plan is based on some key elements, which you will see throughout. How we share information and our data, our digital offer is an absolutely critical piece. We're very fortunate in Somerset that we have country-leading information sharing protocols and systems. So the Transform Family View system is being funded by the Department for Education for us to support other local authorities to learn from our practice. It's that good. It is genuinely radical. What it does is it takes many different management information systems and it connects them through a single front-facing point. It doesn't hold any data. It's like a window into many different rooms. It's incredibly powerful. And it is backed by very strong and legally credible information sharing protocols, and it's being rolled out across the system to those who need it. Another key piece of this puzzle is working in neighbourhoods and localities. What we're very encouraged by is the support that we're getting across, not just there's not just about education and children's social care, obviously working across children's services, but it's also police. We're making connections with One Teams. It's about our health partners. It's about the voluntary sector who, through Connect Somerset, have been there from the outset. And the really critical piece of this is sharing the same boundaries, so professionals come together and join up so that schools don't need to join up for us. And we're just so encouraged. Our new structures have been in place from the 1st of April, and that's really gaining traction. And will be absolutely the foundation for the very significant children's social care reforms that are coming down the line. Supported employment is a critical piece of this, and I know some of you are very passionate about this. We have, and I think people coming into the county have been astonished by the range of supported internship opportunities that we have. This started out as quite a niche area, but it is huge. And the numbers in terms of success rates are really astonishing. Something like 80% of children go on to permanent employment, and the evidence is that creates a lifetime pattern, including for children with some of the greatest level of disability. So it's a key part of the plan. Flexible education is something that we're developing. We did a public consultation on this, was very heavily supported by both parents and professionals, about thinking more flexibly about what education can look like when children cannot attend the school that they're currently attending. Finally, and the executive have agreed and scrutiny considered the SEND sufficiency plan, the expansion of SEND units, small provisions, specialist provisions for unmainstream school sites. And those are rolling out, and we will have a significant number opening, and it's not far now, in September. The new functions that came through the significant reorganisation starting the 1st of April, and we continue to embed. Those are the pieces of the puzzle, and we'll touch on those as we go. And to Nicola, just to take you through some of the financial elements.
Thank you, Amelia. So for those who don't know, Nicola Hicks, Service Director for Finance and Procurement. We can go to the next slide.
I've got a question in there on that. No, but that's fine. So, and it looks like already the slide pack we've got the bigger than the one that we have.
Apologies, we added some slides to be able to cover some of the finance elements, and we'll return the slide pack that you have just so that.
Just to warn you then, so obviously page numbers, basically, your slide pack, it's going to be different than the one we have, or when you go back to it, but they're going to be in order, so a couple of finance ones added. Okay.
Particularly, it was to add more context rather than anything else.
Okay, so also a second on, if you go back to the one that we had just before, then the transformation elements, and John had indicated that you want to ask a question, John.
Yeah, just briefly, loving the neighbourhood localities thing, that's essential, I think. Question is, I should know the answer, I don't. Presumably this will affect academies in exactly the same way, so it's all schools. but aren't private. I think.
Everything in the plan is for all schools, but I'd say it's also important to note this is not just about schools. It is a 0 to 25 plan. So it includes early years settings, it includes colleges and up to 16 providers as well as the independent. Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any other questions before we done? I've got one. Sorry, Simon.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a question on the proposed localities for send units. It does seem to be a bit of a big area where there doesn't seem much coverage. So if you were, I mean, be curriculum, but if you're in the west, it just seems to be a big area. I know it's a rural road, but even in the east, so something clustering, but either have to go to Axbridge or Yove or Wincanton.
Good news is this more an in-depth look at the localities a bit further on. You hold that question because I think that's a really valid point. But when it's a bigger up there, you'll probably get an answer. So I'll just come in quickly. I welcome the comments about people looking at us as trends, as setting the way with the plan and doing everything there. But the question I was going to ask, and I think is relevant now, how do we amplify our voice so that if Somerset are trendsetters, I suppose, or leading the way and learning from other people's errors? Are we speaking to the LGA? How are we using our way, our learning to feed into government? Is that something that we did? So do we want to, is the LGA looking at us as well? How are we feeding into that, the bigger picture?
So we are quite well connected. I sit on the ADCS Education Policy Committee and Richard chairs another ADCS Policy Committee. We are members of a number of national and regional groups, Statistical Neighbours group, and we are well recognised and including funded for some of this work. Homes and Horizons has been subject to national awards. I think we will be taking steps to make sure that we are on platforms, that we are sharing our practice. Some of this is still very much in development, and we've had indication that it's in the right direction, but we do need to implement and embed and make sure that we have that solid evidence. But we are absolutely talking to people about what we're doing, and I am hopeful that the national report that is written off the back of the thematic review last week may give some indication of some of the things we're doing.
Thank you. So perhaps one of the recommendations we might want to do is that we suggest to the executive that we need to be find a way to get the work that we're doing acknowledged, so that people can see how well we're doing what we're doing. Sorry, I've got Francis. So come back on that.
It was just on that particular point, the thematic review, that I was able to attend the feedback. I think you all want executive to see some of the feedback from that, Somerset feedback, informally before the formal feedback. All 6 authorities, that won't be until later in the year. It's really important at this point.
And you list about make a note of that and we'll feed that in. I appreciate it. Francis. Oh, sorry, members, just to be clear, I'll apologise now. I'm using first tense because it's easier for me to keep going as I go. So I accept the fact that we're all councillors, so please forgive me and don't take any unintended consequent issue with it. So Francis.
Just
the data and digital, and first of all, wholehearted support. That's the first thing. The data and digital question. I just wonder whether there is something relevant here about information on housing as being important for our children and their schooling, and just whether that was one. And the other one, in terms of embedding new functions and practical education, there's a feeling I have that this is thinking about relationship with individual schools, and I wonder whether it needs to be more explicit for us, because I'm sure it's going on, that the various head teacher organisations, that there's more strategic groups are very much a part of this, and I'm quite sure it's going on, but I'd just like it to show itself.
So I'm sorry I held up at this slide. I should have shut up and let it go, because we will have, in future slides, we'll be looking at them in more depth. To hold that question for now, Francis, that's it. Is that okay? I'd like to hold, because when we get to that point in the presentation, it will probably, if it's not answered, it would be a good point to make, and then potentially feedback. I've got a member online, Sue, your last one.
Thank you. Sue Simpson, representing East Somerset Federation and Governor position. I would just like to share first-hand experience that since the 1st of April, we have noticed as an organisation a much improved approach to send. And to echo what Amelia has said about this being a very embryonic position at the moment, but so far our real life experience of this is that it is an effective and a very child focused way of dealing with things, and so far it is proving cost effective, which clearly is important, but actually from a child and parent perspective we are finding that we are able to get appropriate help in place a lot quicker because of these sort of additional pathways and these localized relationships that have been built up. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, thank you. No other questions for me then? Sorry.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Can we go on to the next slide? Okay. So I'll run through this table in quite detail, just so everyone's got the same understanding of what this table is showing. So this is showing on line 1, the dedicated schools one that the council received. So you can see there that for last year, we had the 243 million in 2024-25. The next line down shows either the forecast expenditure, which is for future years, but for 24-25, the expenditure was 271 million. And that is projected, that expenditure, as we go up towards 29-30, will go up to the 353 million. So you will see in-year deficit last year, we were short by 28 million. So that's where we've not had enough grant to cover the expenditure that's needed on dedicated schools. So you will see that as we go along, we have a forecast deficit position with no DMP in place. We have the deficit is forecast to be 294 million by the end of 29-30. So that is an incredible figure, non-sustainable, and it is affected by the fact that the government has a statutory override in place at the minute, which means that our deficit that isn't shown on our balance sheet, that override has been extended, but not indefinitely for that period, and I believe only until 28, yeah. And therefore, we really do need to put some actions in place ourselves to try and mitigate the deficit that we've got that's rising in relation to this. I think the other thing to factor in here is there is a white paper coming out in terms of looking at the expenditure that every council is preparing on this, but we don't know the outcome of that, and we can't wait for that. If you look at the next row down, it talks about the DSG investment to deliver the DMP. So as we go through, you will see the plan in place in terms of the expenditure we believe is required to deliver this plan. And the next line down then shows the project work streams in terms of the saving that is forecast at present to deliver. This then shows the next line down, the revised in-year deficit or surplus. So you will see by the time we get to 28-29, if the plan comes to fruition in the way that we've currently forecast, we would be looking to a surplus of 2.911 billion by 28-29. However, that doesn't mean that that deficit position goes away. In the next line down shows the effect of that in-year deficit or surplus and how it projects forward. So by the end of 29-30, we would still have a deficit of 106 million. So this just shows that although we're putting a plan in place, which is going to go a long way to help reduce that deficit going forward, it doesn't mean the deficit goes away, and it's not going to mitigate all of the deficit that we've currently got in that space. Does anyone have any questions in relation to this plan?
Councillor Haynes.
Yeah, thank you for that. Just a little bit confused on the numbers. So in the dedicated schools grant, the top row there, at the moment we're on 243 for this current year, and we're forecasting a 30 million jump in the dedicated schools grant for the following year. And yet the years preceding that are about 5 million increases as we go along. My question really is, if it's 30 million for the first year, why is it not having a similar amount, or certainly a higher amount, or it produces a gloomy picture, unless I've got that, I'm reading that wrong.
So I think 24-25 was last financial year. So although that kind of says forecast expenditure, and that has actually happened, so it's already happened, already gone. We're in 25-26. We know that the grant is 273 million in this financial year, and we projected forward that if we only get inflationary growth on that grant going forward, that's what those figures would be.
Should I follow on? Understand that, thank you, that's great. So looking at that then, so 273, we're now forecasting 278 based on the actual figure that we know is coming. My concern is by continually going, I appreciate we're being very careful and cautious, which is the right approach, obviously. But if that was something between what we just had as an increase, £30 million, and what we're forecasting, even that would add £10 million extra to those columns. My concern, obviously, is that cuts that will have to be made to achieve these sort of figures and reduce this, the deficit itself. We're basing this on assumed very, very low numbers, which don't equate to what's happened previously. I'm just concerned we're going a bit over the top by coming it right back to the very back. I think it's around 2.5% increase each year, based on 30 million increase. That's not 12.5%, 13% previously. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I know we're being cautious, but being over cautious may well affect services that we can give to our residents.
So let me like great.
So there was a one-off grant, you might have remembered it from one of the spending reviews, there was an allocation of a significant sum to the high needs deficit. There was a bit of a row about it because people said that's not going to reach schools, and the government was very openly acknowledging that the additional monies that were going into the DSG were likely to go on to balance sheets and local authorities. So there's no reason to expect that one-off grant is likely to continue. It was a sum that was announced in the money spending.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. Yeah, thank you. That makes sense. So going forward then, so in the autumn review that's coming up, I appreciate you don't know what's going to be saying at this stage. If the review indicates that actually these figures will be better, we can expect more monies, or they're giving a 5%, for example, they give an actual figure. Presumably we will revise this ongoing, because that does dramatically affect the bottom line.
And we've only, like, if you think about our normal general fund, then we get in as the forecast figures taken forward. The only caveat I would make with this is that even we've still got that deficit, it's quite a significant deficit, and that is having, I'm not bringing treasury management into this, but we don't want to get into a situation where we are obviously that has to borrow to fund our DSG deficit. There are many councils out there at the moment that are in that financial situation. So I think anything we can do to mitigate and bring that down, we are helping wider councils.
Andy?
Yes, just to clarify my own mind what's going on. The override has been extended to 27, 28, I believe. And we've got a 2-year agree on the override. Deficit at that point is still predicted to be 129 million. It's well over double what it is now. What are we doing? Are we just kicking the can down the road? Are we just hoping that they're going to come back and say, oh, we'll be given a couple of years to keep doing that until for one day within the lottery. I just feel as though things are not going to get any better. They're just going to get worse and worse over the next few years. I know we're all working hard to find solutions.
I think every council has fed back to government that their council can get out of this without further government intervention. We feel that we would like government to come up with a longer term solution to this and not just keep extending the statutory override, because that doesn't give the council certainty, it doesn't help us with forecasting whether this is going to hit our balance sheet. But whether the government are going to do that, or whether they are just going to keep extending the statutory override because financially they aren't able to give out money to help all councils cover this. So I think that they're either going to just keep extending the statutory override, or they could look to solutions to say where you could capitalise some of the expenditure and do it that way. But we don't know, and that's one of the things we're waiting on them and not being done about. We need a solution to this. We wait.
Thank you. I think, Andy, I preempt where you're going with this. I think as a committee, you've rightly identified there's lots of ifs and buts and maybes and no clarity going forward. One of the things that we may want to suggest as a committee to executive is that they enhance their lobbying of government for a long-term financial view on this. That we also lobby government for a designated school grant that meets the expectations of councils, which is important. I understand the response that they're getting in relation to the fact that there is lobbying going on. I think it would be worth, my suggestion is that this committee adds to that and enhances our concern with the future, the way that the future looks, and that we boost up and do everything we can within our power to make our concerns heard.
I just come back to one question that it hasn't been addressed around master, but we're saying that we don't want to capitalise and borrow against the money that we owe in order to bring that down. If we were to do that and say that the playing field was zero, could we then budget or stay within the budget moving forward, or would we be able to do another big test?
So as it stands, we don't have the means to come in under budget. That's because we have to deliver within statutory guidelines. So everything we're seeing here is about us trying to redesign the whole system to try and get out of what is effectively a trap, because we are caught within that statutory requirement. We have to spend the money, but it's not money that we have. I think what gives me encouragement is that this is very much at the very top of the national agenda now. We know that it's a focus for number 10. It's definitely going to stand internally in the DfE. They've got half the department working on it. It's become political hot potato, and that is really the only thing that we have to rest on, other than doing everything within our power to change what is within our gift, which isn't a lot. What we're doing, we're pushing all the boundaries that we can, and the rest of it. And what I'm pleased to say is I think that we've seen the government very much recognises this is not something that local authorities can fix on their own.
And I guess that's in relation to the deficit, that the thing is to recognise, say, that element around the growth of the grant is not big enough to cover the expectation for us to deliver. So receiving 2 to 3%, it's not high enough growth. That's so weird. If that remains, we're never going to get out of that situation.
Thank you. So at the moment, I've got I think it's Marcus, Simon, and Diego. That's what, but can I just do that one quickly, because I'm a bit confused with the 25-26. Hillview, didn't we agree some additional funding for the school there that would index? I'm sure it gave an indication that the DSG was going to be take over 100 million yearly. Am I right in that?
That was on the projection that we had for what was originally the budget for the DSG deficit for 25-26, but what actually happened was the deficit for 24-25 came in slightly lower.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you. I'm looking at the project work streams and the deficit surplus of what's actually happening in 29-30. And obviously there's a cumulative impact, I'll say into impact, but that's quite a large drop. Now, if this was a 10-year forecast, would we be, if you had to do a 10-year forecast now, would that follow it the same way? Or are we just throwing out, are there too many ifs, buts and maybes? And I mean, we're all sat here now talking about government, assuming that in 5 years' time we have a sane government. We might not have the same government after reading that front page of Daily Mail today, which I don't read, I just have to sell it, so I saw it. I try not to sell it, I do push the Guardian. And I wonder, how can we, we're saying making a decision, and it's like, how can we make decisions? We know how difficult these budgets are to set, and it looks, that's quite impressive that you can do that. So that's that. The question, I suppose, is if it was a 10-year budget, would you foresee it carrying on in that direction?
Just before, I'd like us to try and keep within what we've got in front of us today is massive, and we're just looking over it up to 2030. I don't even know, but we can't even guarantee what's going to happen in the next week, let alone another 10 years.
I quite like when you said, are there too many if, but, maybes? Probably at this stage. And I think the model that we have goes up to 2032, 33, but there's obviously a lot of variations in that we have to monitor. And this is very much a plan. We're going to have to closely monitor the achievement of the plan as we go along to make sure, we may need to flex some things may not work out, we may need to have to adjust funds and spend in one area to deliver some savings in different areas. So I think there's too much to go that far at this stage, and what we've done is link this to the MTFS, which covers the same period as our MTFS, the general fund.
Thank you. Yeah. Simon.
Thanks, Chair. A couple of things from me. Just for real clarity. On the graph, so 29-30 DSG investment delivered the MP. That year, we've got 1.7 million there. Please treat me as a school kid, because someone from the outside can look at that and say, really good value for money for spending 1.7 million investment on to deliver that PMP plan, which will then lead to a deficit of 294 million to 160 million. That's a really very good value for money, perhaps. But if you could explain that a bit further. And the second point, if I may as well, is on the 27-28 year front point. There is still that deficit there, that in-year deficit of 11.3 million. 2 years later, we're looking at a 19.7 year surplus. And I'm only wondering, perhaps it may become clearer later on as we go through the presentation, whether there's anything that can be done much sooner to get to that surplus position before 29 closed. Perhaps that will display in the presentation a bit better.
I'm happy to summarise. I think the key issue in terms of timescales is that the driver of cost is where children go to school. And once a child is in a school, it is highly unlikely that they will not attend that school any longer unless something breaks down. So very, very high cost placements quite often need to time out in terms of that child aging. So there is quite often a hard limit on how quickly you can go your cost base without harm to children's educations. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't potentially arrangements which aren't delivering for children, for families, for their education. Part of the plan is about considering those to see if there's a better arrangement. But that is effectively the break on accelerating that process.
I think if I could save your first question to we've done some other slides, then it might answer it more. I think.
Thank you. Thanks, Councillor Simon.
Thank you, Chair. My question again is around project work streams. I might jump all around the place, but my brain's got a lot of questions. Yes, little brain. with the potential savings going up to 79 million, I just wonder, obviously, we're going to see how what's that's based on. And it is more for big savings suddenly achieved. And there are lots of ifs and buts, but isn't any of this based on what we know from existing councils that may have already implemented changes? And also, if I was central government looking at our forecast and saying that by 29-30 we might have a surplus of nearly 20 million, I'd be saying, well, why haven't you implemented that sooner? Because there wouldn't be any need to bail you out if you've done your job properly in the first place. Yeah, was that?
So I think some of that might become clearer as we go through in terms of the saving there and the deficit. And I think some of the other appendices show that breakdown of investment and that savings required. I'm not sure there's any council out there that isn't trying their hardest to try and reduce the deficit. We brought in some external help people too, who worked with us to come up with the TMP, and they brought with them the experience of what they've seen other councils implement or other councils were undertaking as business as usual, that they made suggestions to our children's team about whether we could change our approach or we could implement things in a different way. And that's largely what the DMP plan is. And that's why it's taken so long to bring before committee, because there is a lot of work doing and going to get a shared agreement on what could or couldn't be delivered and how it's delivered.
The thing that I would add is, I think it's pretty clear there are no local authorities nationally that have achieved dramatic reductions rapidly. There are councils that started in a stronger position, and our education system is improving, but from a low base. So that's not a strong starting point. There are councils that have implemented some things that are working to an extent, but we're not aware of any local authorities that have dramatically, rapidly reduced their costs.
Thank you. So I've got Francis and then Rosemary, then I'm going to move on to slides. We are, otherwise we'll be here at 5 o'clock. I'm sure most of you will.
I just wanted to come back briefly on this is about children and their education and their needs, as well as about the money. And if we suddenly had an excess of money that wipes out the deficit completely, we would still be doing this, because this is not about taking cuts and we take fewer cuts if we have more money. This is about we need to do this. And can I just make sure that my understanding is right on that?
Yes, I don't think there's anything in this plan that we would roll back on if we suddenly had a windfall of an extra £100 million. Probably do more of it and do it faster. Because, as I said, and you know this, Francis, from your work in West Somerset, the system isn't working for parents, families, and children, and that's not because we failed in Somerset. It's because the national system is not coping with the need that we're seeing now in the classroom. So we do need to change, regardless of the money. I think my priorities is if the system was working better, then our budget would look better as well.
Thank you. Rosemary.
What I wanted to ask a question about is that I read the papers and it struck me that if we can reduce the reliance of out-of-county provision, we could reduce the deficit. So if we are sending children out of county, it's costing us a lot more than keeping them in county. So what are we going to do about that? How can we help children with these problems within the county without sending them to Timbuktu, which is what I could see?
We have a really tiny number of children who are out of county, and quite often their needs are extremely complex. The driver of overspending is children who are not in their local school, but they're not leaving Somerset in the main. They are in independent special schools within our borders. It's the average cost of attending one of those independent special schools is in the region of £70,000 a year, and transport is on top of that. So we do have children costing in the region of £150,000 a year, which is, if you consider that the average child receives in the region of 4,000 to 5,000, is one of the reasons that the budget is under such pressure. So the key thing in this plan is to create special places in our local schools so that children can attend, particularly their local primary, and looking at other solutions in the secondary space. They can attend their local school, receive a special education there without having to get onto bus and travel an hour or go to a very, very high cost place. That's the core.
Going to move on, but forgive me, I'm just going to get on my soapbox for a second. It's not the young persons that are causing the cost, it's their need. This was it. So a bit like when we talk about care, it's talk about placements rather than a young person costing us £150,000, because that's not the young person's fault. That's the young person getting the appropriate education and support they need to allow them to become educated. I know you know that, but I'm saying that out loud now because I think it's important that we recognise that.
So thank you for the question.
Okay, here we are.
Can we have the next slide? So, this table shows the People 2 recommendation. So the People 2 recommendations are in your slide pack, so they are Appendix 1. So we just listed out here the recommendation, the part year being we are asking for some investment for 25-26 to enable us to start the action to complete some of these recommendations. So the first column shows the part year funding that will be allocated to the DMP. And then the second column shows the full year, and it shows there's an ongoing cost for some of those recommendations for the ongoing up to 1.722 million. The next section of the table shows the funding source. So there's some existing funding that's already in place, especially for 25-26, that can cover 419,000 of that expenditure. And the growth in the DSG expenditure is 426, and then there's general fund expenditure request of 455,000. So the executive are being asked in the decision paper to agree for 455,000 to be moved from corporate contingency and allocated towards the DMP to enable that funding to start to be spent to enable these actions to go forward. Any allocation of future funding towards the DMP is a full council decision, and therefore the DMP will have to follow through to full council to get agreement to allocate future year funding, because executives don't have the power to do that. So the table there just shows kind of that funding there in terms of what we're going to spend this financial year, ongoing future, and shows how we could also fund some of it through flexible use capital receipts or capital receipts, and that's just something that we will work on as we look at the funding that the areas of spend that funding is going out of. Does anyone have any questions?
I ask to put it into the revenue terminology for a second. The budget for 25% was agreed by full council. That's am I right in saying that to implement the first stage of this plan, executive are being asked, or it only costs in the region of 1.722 million.
For 25-26, it will cost 1.299, of which we can allocate some existing funding sources, and therefore we're only asking for expenditure of 455,000 through the general fund, and then DSG expenditure of 426. So basically, the new funding that is being attributable to the 25-26 is the 881.
Okay, so with your finance hat on, is this proposal acceptable to our finance team and in effect achievable?
Yes, it's very acceptable, and in terms of we've done a lot of work with Amelia and her team around how that expenditure will be used and a lot of challenge around could we do it in a different way? And actually the timing of that funding, and we're going to be working with the this team. Some areas of expenditure within the DMP will require business cases to back up that spend.
Thank you. Members, just the reason I'm just making that point, as obviously we were, as we indicated, that this was coming to us a few weeks ago, this report, but there were issues about getting this agreed. So to hear that finance are comfortable with the direction of travel is good to hear. So
Yeah.
thank you. Yeah.
Thanks, Chair. Just noting that the people to recommendations that sort of linked to, haven't had a chance to quickly see what it is that we want to do this next year. Apart from strictly 179, number one is to recruit a new head of SEND as soon as possible. So it says, I'm just wondering if there's a timeline as to when that can be achieved, because I suspect that the success of this plan is largely down to having that person in post.
So obviously the timeline will be constrained by the ability to release the funding, so that there'll be a decision required for council. So we are working to that timeline, but we are liaising with HR colleagues around resourcing to make sure that we can move as quickly as possible. But we are also having informal conversations with potential candidates just to try and get some capacity as quickly as possible. And there are interested people in this in the system. So we're doing from a professional HR perspective the kind of things that we can do, supported by our colleagues to accelerate that process. But obviously we have to follow the requirements to the approval.
Thank you. Please continue.
Next slide, please. But apologies for the busyness of this slide and quite confusing, but I think it's just really to show the table on the right hand side shows the savings attributable up to 2930, and also the rec column is the reconciliation to the people to recommendation. So those numbers there reflect the people to recommendation. So it shows in there the projected savings and then the annual investment required. Some of the investment required is to deliver the work streams and deliver specific pieces, whereas we do have some investment like the head of SEND, which we would call more enabling. So they're not linked to a specific recommendation in the plan. They will overarch the plan completely, a bit like any transformation activity will be across the board. It won't be one specific recommendation. So that's where we've broken that down into work streams and enabling. All of this is more broken down in the appendices in much more detail to the slide. But I think to answer some of your point, Diego, around the return on investment, you'll see there that the finance are happy because it's showing there in those financial years that every pound invested, the return on investment. So that's why we're very supportive of getting this BMP plan in place and agreed, because we believe that every time we can invest, we will see that return and that reduction on the deficit. If I could do the next slide and then take questions on both of them, if that's okay. If we could just get, because I think some of it is answered in a more of a summary table here, where actually we can see the cumulative savings across that. So when we talk about the 79 million by 2930, I think it's important to recognise that that's cumulative figure. So year on year, that saving will come in, and that's why it gets to 79. So we are not suddenly saying for something we're delivering in this plan, we're going to just hit that all in 1 year. What we're saying is year on year, we should start to see that saving come through. But that is also why the investment increases, because we built in the cost of that investment in terms, and then that shows the return on investment and why we are recommending that we do spend additional general fund and DSG funding to get this.
That's more of a comment than a question, really. So if the return for investment for every pound is £9.40, then also that's doing great. And, you know, our council should really take it on board to do this for the council's finances. But as great as it is, because that's such a big return on investment, it also sets alarm bells in my head, asking myself, is that actually realistic and achievable? I'm sure it is, but that's what's bringing in my head. It's actually, is this really achievable? That's a huge return on investment. And I'd be interested to know whether you've had examples of other authorities doing the same thing and getting the same kind of return on investment, projecting the same return on investment.
So there are a lot of assumptions built into this, and one of the things I think is important to emphasise is the collaboration of my team and finance has been supported by finance building some quite complex models to enable us to track down to child level of whose education we're supporting at what level, and how that then tracks year by year, so we can look at a full group of over 5,500 children with plans and track how different movements of placements would impact over quite a long period of time. That's a really significant enterprise. But what that needs to connect to in my team is actually knowing the names of those children, knowing how their education is going, and working with schools to enable their outcomes. So it's a huge enterprise. What that means is there's going to be an enormous amount of ongoing data we're going to have to be checking at all times to make sure that what we're doing is working. And as you said, there are things that won't work. There will be things likely that work better than expected. So this will be something that we are continually reviewing, as you do with any budget management, and we will get better as we go. But the reality is that it should be possible to educate all our children within the envelope that we have. That's why the ROI is so big, because we have a trajectory of understanding. But it should be possible to bring that with a manageable level. That depends on us settling children into succeeding in their education the way they want them to.
If I could just add, I think Amelia would add to this element that we have to come back with some further changes to policies and different projects that may come forward, and that may require further investment. So we may see that figure change. We're not, when we talk about closely monitoring this going forward, when we get agreement on this, we are going to have to be all over it in terms of finance, and obviously tracking all of this really closely on a monthly basis. We've had a financial modelling post in who has done this in other authorities. It's extra resource that we brought in, and he's worked incredibly hard to do the modelling on this and has seen similar investment in other councils to deliver similar return. And it's all about building capacity to enable change to be made.
I'm conscious that we're covering this slide's covering lots of points which I was looking to pick up, and Councillor Hadley and Councillor Rodriguez have rightly identified. So one of the things, the recommendations that we might want to consider at the end is how this is monitored and the reviews are taking place. So I'm taking your point, and I think that's going to be one of the big recommendations that we make. So I acknowledge that, so the monitoring and the review. But the question I was going to add in the first instance, building on what Diego and Andy has said, and picking up on the trajectory here, I'm assuming that's a managed bit, and then thank you, Amelia, for your answer, because I was going to say, are we able to include in our review a potential to say, let's bring this investment forward because it will make the trip quicker? Is that, you see what I'm saying? So getting in 2930 to make the savings, is there a review process that could potentially bring some of it forward to say, hypothetically, it's going quite well, executive, if you let us have this amount of money, we can make that trip quicker?
So in at paragraph 6.1 in the papers, we outline, we detail those things that have already been agreed that we're working on, but where we are anticipating that policy change will be required going forward, and potentially additional resources. And the purpose of that is to recognise that some of these areas that potentially we could accelerate will need an individual focus in the coming months. And there may well be other areas for savings. I certainly believe that there are. There may well be additional need for investment. I think certainly the indication from other areas who invested heavily in supported employment is that the return on investment around supported employment is really, really quite significant. That's quite, and we've only just established a permanent team in that area on the 1st of April. So we are anticipating bringing back a paper in the spring when we've had 6 months of data from their impact to look at whether the additional investment would bring additional savings in that area. So that's one example, but there are other things. I certainly think that there is potential in the area of alternative provision and how we fund schools, potentially additional savings, but that may require additional resources to realise those will be coming through.
That it triggered my ears. Was that 6.1 or 16.1?
16.
That's what. Thank you for the clarification. And that answers one of my other questions here. I'll say it now so that it can be recorded in the minutes. And you sort of answered it, but the report seems to indicate the start of many changes to this service. How will future changes be designed, reported and implemented? Then you actually answered that for, but I think it was a point I wanted to make that we had. We've got Sue online. Would you like to come in, please?
Thank you, Chair. I think it's important to recognise that a lot of the changes revolve around staff training, a hearts and minds change in philosophy, and taking a lot of people with us. And that doesn't happen immediately. I think a lot of us would love to see financial improvement a lot quicker. But, you know, in terms of staff training, it's going to take me a year to train, send specialist learning assistants, for example, and that's just to get the ball rolling. And I think this is one of these places where, because we're dealing with human beings and because we are asking them to do something that is perhaps new and vaguely slightly uncomfortable, and I mean in terms of all stakeholders there, then actually allowing for the process of time passing and generational change is really, really important.
Thank you for that. Again, I'm conscious of the time and we've got lots of implementation slides coming in, so do you want to carry on?
So, as we said at the beginning, the SEND action plan is a very, very comprehensive plan to deliver the transformation. It is led across children's services, but also from health. And we have a strong and mature partnership around the table in the SEND partnership, which Sławek attends. And there are a lot of things that have already happened. There is an awful lot more to do. But what I would say is really important about the plan is that it is one plan, which might sound a statement of the blindingly obvious. But when there is a national crisis like we have, arguably now in SEND, quite often what happens is you get a proliferation of different organisations asking for plans. And so we've had to work quite hard to make sure that whether it is Ofsted or the Department for Education, or it is a local government ombudsman, that all of those plans track back to one plan. Because one of the things we've encountered in the past is that if you're reporting in many directions at once, your productivity decreases commensurately. So I think underlining this transformation is that one plan, but it is also a living plan, and we will continue to keep it under review as various things come for the decision and consideration. Questions about?
Thank you. I was going to, at this point, talk about the oversight and the scrutiny of you've already seen the breadth and depth that this is covering. One of the things that as chair and vice chair of this committee, we can see in this, that it's bigger than just us around this table. And it involves lots of different facets of the council as well. So when it comes to overview and scrutiny, one of the things that I'd like to suggest to the committee that we look at the end for one of our recommendations is that when we recommend to executive that they create an oversight body of some sort, whether it's a working group or what, or we are able to set up a subcommittee that comes from here. But it's more than just children and family scrutiny. We've got finance elements and it's a bigger picture. And I'm sorry, when we're talking about the best part of £200 million, it's going to need some proper oversight. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but more targeted. So my suggestion is going to be that we make one of the recommendations to make executive. I'm not sure how it's going to work yet, and I'm not sure whether they do, but we acknowledge the fact that it's bigger than just us. We acknowledge the fact that it's going to need some specific monitoring and oversight from, I would suggest, potentially other officers as well as councillors as well. And so I'm saying it now because this is the point. Because when we look at this, we've got work together, we've got getting help early, we've got access to the right support, we've got preparation for adulthood, and that's with all the finance elements attached to that as well, and the policy development. Because one of the things I want to make sure that we try to do as a street is keep up with the changes, because I've written down that this is me just using my words. There's a potential for making policy as we go. We make that. We need to be more observant than that and more managed than that, so that we can keep up. So one of my suggestions is going to be that we make a suggestion to the executive that they want to consider how they do it. And just to explain a little bit my rationale, for the last 18 months, 2 years, executive have asked all of the individual scrutiny committees to monitor the overspend and the replacement for that. And that was a hard job just on its own for children and family scrutiny to be able to do. So we may need to push back a little bit is to executive. That's why I'm making that point now. So please disagree with me if you want. So I'm seeing lots around the room. I'm just thinking, okay. So there's a question. So Suave.
Just wanted to add, and I would absolutely agree with this, that there has to be some form of monitoring body which will be overseeing everything, but it will have really great opportunity as well. Hoping that people who are developing the policy will take this into consideration, that we have lots of different groups which are driving lots of things forward, but not always working towards the same aim. And therefore we are very disjointed. So we have really good opportunity which could be linked very well with the first part of the conversation we had around this sense strategy. Once that's reviewed, that gives a really good direction of travel for everybody, and then that can be disseminated into other groups and make that work more coherent. But what I feel is really very important that we have a quality assurance process within that as well. We're talking about the whole plan of savings and recovery from the deficit. It's very much underpinned by the opening the cent basis in the schools. And yet, we know very well that there is a lack of expertise in some of those places. So how to assure that, and how the plan and the strategy resolve this, and how to then the local authority has the confidence that the bases are successful, because there's nothing else worse than opening those bases year 2 years later being unsuccessful, and then will not have the impact which desired. I'm just thinking about that quality assurance development, how that works together with the strategy.
Perfectly add on. So
I think just on that point, in reflecting some of the conversations we've had with you, Suave, and with colleagues from the Special Schools Association generally, the role of special schools in this transformation is critical. And that is one of the lines that we are proposing in terms of the overall investment, is to secure that funding in each locality for that special school support. And I know that's something that has been raised by special school colleagues that they think is critical. I think from an education service perspective, we would agree. So just to flag that is one of the lines in the proposal plan.
thank you. Okay, I'm going to take some answers if I can move on.
One absolutely QA. And QA is a learning thing, and not only for schools and units in schools, but also for all the work that is done internally in terms of staff and so on. So that's I think something which needs to be really important in our thinking. It was certainly one of the drivers towards improvements of children's social care over the years. And the other thing I would say is oversight, absolutely, multi-agency oversight. And a multi-agency oversight of the whole lot, which means looking at other people as well as at us. And where there's the Assembly Improvement Board, which was just such a multi-agency board, which certainly at one stage was chaired alternately by the chief executive of the local authority and the chief executive, the predecessor for the whatever the current board is. I can't remember the initial board with the health service. But is that a vehicle that could be enhanced for this purpose?
So I would say that there's likely needed a broader conversation about governance as a whole. This is only one part of children's transformation, as we're very well aware. And I know that's something that Councillor Revens is here and has encouraged us to be thinking about in terms of the education system. And I think that some of the things that Sławek is touching on, there's been a huge amount of good work in bringing people around tables to be part of collective decision making. We're really grateful for the amount of time that colleagues and outside the council have given to that. But we're probably at a pivot point to now to move those things on. And I think there's a timely moment for us to say, how do we make sure we have the right people around the table to provide both that challenge as so it's genuinely system led.
Certainly I meant to include stakeholders and partners in the scrutiny process. So noted. Thank you. Moving on.
So if I can just run through quickly what comprises the working together element of the plan. Alternative provision and independent non-maintained special schools are an absolutely critical element, not only because they provide for some of our most vulnerable children who need something different, but also because they can collectively represent one of our largest areas of expenditure. And the critical thing is about understanding what good looks like and what good value looks like. And certainly we are aware of some absolutely brilliant work that is taking place within the county, as well as a very wide range of arrangements. And I don't think I've ever heard universal agreement that those arrangements are all either appropriate or good value. And so it's we're very hopeful that executive agreed we can implement a dynamic purchasing system for alternative provision. And there is huge potential. We just launched a consultation around basically technical reorganization of our pupil withdrawal units. And all of those are part of an overall rethink, making sure that every child has somewhere to be educated that is right for them, but also right for them in a way that gets them progressing in their education, that's getting good outcomes and is affordable. And we have many arrangements that are none of those, or not all of those. And so it's a key element of the plan. Neighbourhoods and localities, obviously, we touched on, and that really is about implementing the very ambitious proposals and continuing to roll them out to wider professionals where that's appropriate, or connecting in wider groups of professionals where that's appropriate. We're receiving a lot of positive support for that approach. Engagement and the local offer, and I'm very grateful to Sue Simpson's comments. The involvement of parents and the access that parents have to really good information about what is available in their local area, particularly at an early stage when they're aware that a child needs something more, is critical, and there's a great deal more they can do in that space. Data and digital we've touched on, and what I would say is that we have been doing some, and this is sort of the unglamorous work that often goes unheralded, but looking at transactions, looking at processes, and some of the processing and transactional costs of the SEND system are astronomical. And so using things like AI, we've had real success in a pilot with social care using magic notes, where in the pilot social workers were able to reduce their time administration by a day a week, which is absolutely extraordinary. And that's freeing up time to spend time with children, which is what we are hoping maybe able to learn some lessons in the sense system as well, about cutting down on bureaucracy, to spend more time with people. And joint commissioning is an area we're doing some good examples. And also the Misterton school, the first of its kind in the country, was jointly commissioned with CAMS, the Mental Health Service. But there's more that you can do in this space, particularly around areas of therapies, which are of mutual interest. You can just see on the next one, I'll take these two together and take the questions. I've just highlighted those things that we're working moving forward. So we are progressing the locality model. We are looking to expand capacity for the inclusion of Viceline. That's been in place for some time, but demand has increased. Transactional finance is an area we'll be looking for additional resources. And then areas that we would be looking to bring back to this community, to this committee, to executive, are around alternative provision, pupil referral units and behaviour partnerships, following the current consultation, and then looking at whether there are more digital models that we could implement around that transactional space. But we'll need wider corporate support. That scope and suggest that that is something to take forward.
Members, any questions? Councillor Hunt, John.
Yeah, thank you for that. Terrific news using AI and reducing the admin time by 1 day for each week, which is fantastic news. A slight concern is I'm with you, that extra day and extra periods of time saved should be spent for children. That's really important. I'm a little concerned that the powers that be might think, well, we could reduce that working week from 5 to 4 and perhaps save money. And that is something we just want to make that point. I think we must be very careful not to think that we need to save some money. Well, let's do that because we've saved that using AI. I think that's quite an important point to make.
So I can assure you, I've never been party to any conversations where anyone suggested that we take that resource back. The need is so great that what we need is to be able to take that resource and move it upstream into that preventative work, which so often gets pinched when capacity isn't there. So and certainly we have some decision makers in this room, and that's never been any part of any conversations. It's about bringing up capacity to do more of the things that halts those escalations of situations.
Just come up. Yeah, and importantly too, I imagine, certainly from a staff viewpoint, the carers viewpoint, having a day with the children instead of not wasting time at doing the admin, must improve their own morale, sure.
Absolutely, and I don't think we've ever met anyone on any team that says what I really enjoy doing is writing up loads of meetings, and very encouraged, by the potential for our educational psychologists. In fact, I was with them this morning, and they were using Magic Notes to record the session that I've done, and that just means that someone instantaneously can press a button, and then that can be shared with people who aren't able to attend. It's not everything that AI can do. Plenty of things that absolutely must be done in human beings. That evaluation, that professional use of social worker expertise, of psychological expertise, that has to be human. But things that just take up time, like painstakingly typing up notes, AI does much better. And
it's positive for AI.
But there is, as you want to remember with AI, there's still a very important need to have the human eye look over it, because there's to assume that because I've filled that in and sent it, AI has got it in the right place and implemented it. You need a bit more confidence before that can happen.
Absolutely, and I don't think we have any processes that are AI only. That would obviously be unwise. But there are some manual tasks that are simply time consuming. I know, for example, we did some analysis of a survey, and I don't know, I've certainly done this in my professional career, of going through the pre-text comments of a survey and trying to synthesize them. It's an incredibly lengthy job, and human beings, I'm not very good at it. AI does that instantaneously and really quite brilliantly. So some of those things, it's about identifying that thing that is really not, the human beings not adding value, bringing the human being in at the end, to look over that and to make sure that it's quality assured.
What I'm making is that you need to remember that human element needs to be looked at it, because there's lots of talk at the moment within the council of things like AI writing the minutes of a meeting. That doesn't always work, because you still need to sense check them, so someone has to read them. That's the point I was making. But just moving on, so just, it's interesting to see that in this particular slide, you're talking about review of alternative provision, PRUs, the consultation that's currently taking place. And I'd ask that this committee, whenever possible, at the earliest opportunity, be involved in that. Just a small point, the review in the PRUs, the first I heard about it was when the consultation was launched. I'm not sure whether any other members of that, so I think it would be helpful if that we, as a committee or chair and vice chair of this, we are kept involved going forward so that we're very clear, because there's one thing that comes out, it's like reading it when I was reading it through the paper, making my notes, another policy, change this, change that, and you need some sort of monitor or way of keeping account until the things are going, because I don't want us to be in a position. The last thing I would ever, and I know it's not something we want, is in a few years' time, someone looks back and goes, we looked at that policy then, what was that? Those sorts of things. So early conversations, please.
So apologies, I think this is definitely on the scrutiny forward plan. For the forthcoming meeting, I understand. But obviously, one of our objectives for this process is for us all to be able to see all of the things that are coming forward, so that we can have quality conversations about the scrutiny forward agenda, and everyone is cited on decisions that are coming down the line, and I think that will help to.
Thank you. Okay, moving on. We'll have it, Lisa.
So I think just so that colleagues are aware, those are our boundaries. And if anyone ever asks where do the boundaries come from, they reflect the primary care network boundaries in Somerset. There was a recognition early on from Somerset that if you're going to integrate with health, you have to respect the fact that they are not going to change their boundaries. And actually, because we can change our boundaries, it's really important to come around to enable them to be part of that conversation by following the boundaries that they have to use. The black line represents the way that we've cut that for education services in terms of 6 localities that we are now meeting every single week to review those requests that are coming into the schools and coordinate, which is, I suppose, really kind of opening a lot of people's eyes to the kinds of conversations that happen really work in a multi-agency way.
Sorry, the wrong button, right? Chair, so that's a lovely time to shut that button down. I don't use it very often. There was a question about localities, wasn't there, Simon or Marcus, was it?
Simon.
Oh, what's myself now, right? Sorry, Chair, now you're asking me, I forgot my thing. Oh, yeah, geographic areas where the send, the send localities where they seem to be black for the West Somerset, and also right in the middle, where if you were in Westbury Street, well, you might have a considerable distance to access the units.
So the programme of sent units, apologies, is just the first phase. So what we had to prioritise in terms of September opening was those areas that had space that could be renovated in a relatively short space of time. It was ready to be used, and where the school was in a good place to be able to move quickly. So that wasn't every possible provider. One of the things that we're proposing to bring forward as further decision is the rest of that £15 million programme in terms of the government capital grant for SEND, which the intention in bringing that forward is to plot out a programme of SEND units and of other expansions across the next 5 years, covering absolutely every corner of the county. And that really is great, gaining traction. We're having more and more conversations all the time. But the current plan, which is for this September, was based on a bit on experience. And we did try and spread as much as we could, but that there was a limit to what we done in this time.
Quick follow-up. I assume that's quite easy sell to schools anyway, because they're living in the schools and taking those children who might have issues out and in classrooms.
So we've been, and I think what schools are very clear about this, these are not resource bases. So a resource base that we do have them in the county will be a provision where a child will come out of the classroom and access some additional support before going back to their classroom. But their main task in the mainstream environment. These are special school places. So the one parallel, if you are familiar with Brookside in Street, Brookside has mainstream classrooms and special classrooms, and they're both part of the school community, and you see them both around the school, and they're part of the school family. But it's a very different curriculum. It's a different pedagogy and teaching, and the children with some of them are very, very high levels of need. So this is a different model than we traditionally had in most schools. And I think that's the need that we're seeing is children who need a special school place, but one that is near them.
Just quickly, and I apologize, Simon, I jumped again, and it's another slide a bit further on, but but just for some clarity, please. I mean, we've got 6 localities. One of the things that the report talks about is the fact that since April we've been working around this model and the way that so that all of our teams have started to work in that sort of area. Do we have a policy that says that? What is helping our staff understand how the localities are working and how they should be working?
So the localities have quite a big effect, but what they effectively are, the policy that enabled localities, and there was obviously scrutiny around that at the time, was the reorganisation of staff. So the big change that we made was to ensure that we had the right number of staff in teams to stretch across 6 areas, and that they had clearly defined roles to be able to come together in a sensible way. So it was the reorganisation that enabled that. Now, the thing that affects the change is the practice. So effectively, the thing that makes the difference is they come together in a meeting. And when they're in that meeting, they're using the policies that they would use in their roles ordinarily. So their roles haven't changed. They're following that policy and practice, but they're doing it together. So it's about how we connect those existing practice and policies in different teams to enable them to make decisions together without changing their core statutory.
Okay, sorry, just a second. Forward.
Yeah, I think you partly answered that question. I'm just wondering when these units are set up to be part of a single but separate from the school, where's the staffing coming from? Is the staff coming from existing school staff? Or new staff going in, and is the school responsible for getting it?
There is a funding model, and that's been devised with some of the schools who are opening in September. So they are being funded at the same rate as a special school because they're being expected to deliver special school education, which is more expensive. The classrooms have 6 to 8 children in them. And there is a comprehensive program of training and development so that they are able to operate successfully with that special school model. It's connected to the government's PINS program, which stands for Partnerships for Inclusion of Neurodiversity in Schools. It's quite a comprehensive program. And most of the need that we're seeing is associated with neurodiversity. So our principal education psychologist has been devising that curriculum, that approach, and supporting schools where appropriate with that. So there's quite a lot of help going in to enable them to do that. They are employees of the school, the staff, but the funding reflects the fact that there is a smaller staff cooperation.
Sorry, so you're saying that if there's teaching assistant working in school, they'll also be trained and some of their tasks now and they'll be working within that provision, or
I'm just conscious of, sorry, don't just, I should, in my error, I misunderstood Simon's question. We're talking, in a couple of slides time, we're talking specifically about the special units in the schools. Some of the points that we're asking questions on may be covered there. I apologise. I don't mean to cut you off, but just conscious that we may be repeating it again later. So I'm just covering that, but I don't know if Andy put his hand up and John wants to speak, so, and Liz, so do we? Wonder.
Yes, relevant to this slide that I have. Assuming a child lives in West Somerset, he or she moves to Bridgewater, the Bridgewater area. Map here from 11 to 1. Is there a danger in any way that he can slip through the net because the team in Bridgewater hasn't picked him up? Was this where the big round table, everyone meeting together, can pass those notes on to each other to help them?
So in the main, the focus of the conversations are on the basis of schools coming to us and saying, we need your help with a situation around a particular child. So at the moment, that works primarily reactive because all of their capacity is focused on that, on their active space. The current consultation that's been launched around the people referral units is about this point about making sure that we know where every child is. So theoretically, every child should be on the school roll. So they move from one school to the next. There's a formal process for that. The reality is we know there's an awful lot of children who are not on any roll at all. And that's one of the things that we would be proposing to enable if the consultation then is adopted in the decision would be to create a local authority role so that children who are not on roll could be taken on by the people referral unit. I say local authority in there, but to be the people. So I think there is a real issue around children who have the potential to be lost in the system because they're not on school roll. If they are on school roll, we track that quite rigorously. If they are simply moving address, the locality has tracks children not on the basis of where they go to school, but where they live. And that's to enable us to make sure we're having that conversation with also children's social care operates on that basis rather than the school.
That's right. Liz, did you want to come in? Sorry.
I may, please, Chair. We've brought into the conversation the capital expenditure, so the big investment, because that is included in appendix. That is part of, correctly, the return on investment. Why is that capital expenditure on the unit talking about? I just wonder when these papers come to executive, some way, Nicola, that it can be clear where that is government funding. I think that would be really helpful because I'm not sure that it's clear that there is government capital funding as well as what we're asking this principal to contribute. I think if we could differentiate, that would make it easier for people to understand that there is actually really significant investment.
Thank you. Yes. Andy, yes.
Just very quickly, I mean, most times we've seen so far go up to 2930. So are we envisaging by 2930 that we would have enough school places across the Somerset for all the children that need them?
So we are preparing to bring back a specific piece looking at that 5-year capital plan. That's quite a big decision. We've obviously only had to see them in the first phase, but absolutely what we've been endeavouring to do is to create as many places as quickly as possible because the financial ramifications are really significant. But this is untested and it's absolutely in line with the direction being taken by the government. They've been very clear even before the white paper that they think this is the direction to go. But this is on a large scale. This is quite new. So we will be learning as we go. And if that accelerates and potential is to accelerate, we will do so. If we need to slow down to ensure that we are maximising the educational potential and the financial return, then we'll do so. So we'll need to keep it.
Quickly from that. I take it the forecast that we've had up to 2930 include the fact that that process is going to continue. Because you say that we haven't yet actually, we've only got the first phase signed off. So the next phase is to get the further schools in place. Does that forecasting for doing all those extra spaces, or is there a potential for the deficit to come down even further because we get more places on the screen?
Just school places, like the one, it's like what I know too. I'm comfortable that the council in their planning for school places is quite that in effect that when a young person is born, it goes onto our spreadsheet so that from school places planning, is that what you mean? Yes.
I'm talking about the SEND places, actually, the special spaces that we're creating. We've got funding to create so many by September. Obviously, especially West Somerset, there's not a terrible amount being created up there, so there's obviously more to come. But you're saying that hasn't actually been signed off yet. But the more that are signed off, the more money we should save. And I'm just wondering if the savings for all the special places have been put into the forecast, or is there a potential for that forecast to get better?
Exactly how many spaces have been put into the forecast? We do have Andrew Good on the line. I don't know if he is able to answer that question for us, but what I would say is that understanding is the forecast is pessimistic because we don't want to overstate where we don't yet have a strong basis to do that. So absolutely, and this is what that pains to say, there is absolutely potential for us to go further. We just need to make sure we've got that evidence base so that we're not overclaiming what we think is possible. But yes, I think there is definitely room for growth.
The executive members are trying to go for
If I may just say, Chair, and the capital programme for budget setting on the 5th of March, there is a line in there, special educational needs. There is a line in there from 24-25 through to 27-28. So this hasn't, none of this has come out of the blue. This has been work in progress for a long time, and it has been carefully explained, and it has come together. And we're in a position where we're waiting for a government white paper. We've got your very good points about the same strategy, and we've got this plan coming forward. This plan will, I'm absolutely convinced, feed into the government. And so that circle with those 3 points on the circle will go backwards and forwards in different ways. I just commend Somerset actually being ahead of many other places, and in some places I think even the government thinking. I think Somerset is forming government thinking, and that is the reason why we're not getting it in the order of government white paper, SEND strategy, deficit management plan, which is what you would expect in any other world. But because of the financial pressures on councils, you're seeing talented officers in councils moving in a particular way. But I've been on some of the briefings when I've stood in for reverends, and there is no doubt the Minister for Local Government understands that need to move quickly, and understands where councils are, and understands the massive risk of viability of councils because of these deficits, which are not only large, but growing.
And may I add to that as well? I just want to amplify something that Olivia had said when I was at slightly review. Certainly, I can see in the appendices and so on that there are savings anticipated, running through the years pertaining to these special education units. But I'm also quite confident that we've been as pessimistic as we can be, pessimistic on the savings and put all the costs there. We have to try and be that way. I think that's important. I was also going to say that from a children's point of view, I don't mean children's, I mean from children's point of view, absolutely right. Yeah, we've been afraid to have a white paper and then get a strategy and then do all this stuff. Right now, we have children who need school places and they're at home and they're not getting school places they need. So we have, no matter what, we have to actually push ahead with this. And all of the, I'm really assured and happy and reassured as well by the kind of work that's been done between finance and our team and children's to try to bottom out as much as possibly where we're going in terms of projections. It's very hard, and we're in a situation now where since 2017, the number of the HCPs across the country has quadrupled in organisations like ours in that time. So, what we must be doing is this stuff to look after those children we've already identified, and also all the preventative work and locality work we've been talking about, trying to get ahead of that. But I'm feeling as confident we keep looking at it and we keep improving it. I do think for the children's sake, we can't really wait any longer. We do have to move ahead with something that we've got confidence in.
Thank you. I think friends, we'll be nearly going to 2 hours, so I'm going to suggest a 10-minute comfort break before we move on to the next bit. Back for 2:30 to restart, please. Oh, this was, yeah, just to remind you that there is the reason we're in here, there's a planning bit next door, so the ability to go through to the kitchen would probably not be advisable, but there is a kitchen just down the road, down the corridor, and it's clear. So 10 minutes, please. And if you also do, I'm going to be strict because I don't want us to be here until the sun goes down. So I'm going to say there would be. Actually, would you move on to the next slide, please? And then we can move.
Be quite rapid, just mindful of time. So just to flag, speech language and communication is a key area in terms of children's need. We look at the relevant support. We are thinking about culture and practice, particularly, and this will come into some of your inboxes around concerns and complaints, and those requests for some investment to ensure that my parents have a good experience. Assessment and identification has been some fantastic work, particularly in the earlier years of life, and there's a request for us to be able to deploy some additional grant money that we have received in the early years, as well as maximising the impact of transform. There is, we've had a great response from a wide range of organisations around enrichment background, and that early access to activities is a key area for children around SEND, which we will be looking at through our multi-agency partnership. See on the next slide, now you should move that along. That we're continuing to look at that implementation of that early intervention virtual school. What that means is those are staff working in the early years around children with highest level of need. We need additional resource for complaints and tribunals. That's in the request, in the decision. We would be expecting to bring back an analysis of demand and what interventions potentially could drive additional savings in that area. And what I would just say on the next slide, and I'll just pause there. The systems that are listed for transform.
It's
me, I can't.
The systems listed for transform, that is not an exhaustive list. I think this was an image from an earlier instantiation of transform. So the team continues to expand the capabilities of transform systems. I think you would have a question about which systems have been added. I would take that away and get that to you in writing. But just to flag that it's not an exhaustive list.
Just before, so that was 3 slides then. So questions on any of those? I'll go first then. Getting help early. So I've written down here, getting help early, that's fine. Is that early help? Let me finish the sentence. So this policy is dealing with young people already in the system. Are there plans for investing in preventative or early intervention services to make young people approaching their education journey better? So just to explain to someone, if I'm not making sense, so what we're doing now is dealing with the young people already in the system. And my question relates to young people, as was indicated, that were between 0 and 4. So in theory, in an ideal world, what we want to be doing is getting early help in place so that we identify young people's needs earlier so that we can then put preventative work in place and support. So is this early help, or is this what we do for policies going forward?
So this area is both early years and early help. Our early help quite often is in the social care space, sort of just before, in that space before, we're trying to prevent a child going into care. What we're looking at here is really early help. So it's about improving the provision around children and families before that need escalates. And that's why we're flagging speech, language and communication, for example, as an absolutely key intervention, which is both early help and early years is a key area.
Swap it, I mean, second.
Just want to answer this one, maybe I said, I feel it's absolutely crucial as part of the early intervention and early years, is to review the funding for the early years. They are so underfunded because it's not statutory service. Therefore, a lot of work which could be done very early around SEND could be addressed. So I know one of the earliest provisions which we're working very closely with as a school, and the work which we are doing limits their ability because of lack of funding. I believe that if that work was completed, if the funding was accessible to that route, we will not be dealing with a lot of challenges later on in life. So I just feel that that should be also part of the SEND strategy and addressing that issue.
Thank you for making that like that. I think we're coming on a similar line here. Because one of the things members I was going to suggest is that a lot of families and come to me and say how hard they identify a young person has a need of some sort very early, but then the ability to get that person A identified in a formal way and B the necessary support in place is very limited. So what it means is, to the young, sometimes, well, every time, but for a majority of cases, in my opinion, young people that don't start getting the help they need or support until they start school, and then it's often too late or a long process to get that help. So one of the points I was going to make, and thank you, Swabek, for picking it up, was another of the recommendations we might want to make to executive is that early help and intervention is put in place. The route to support is made a lot easier. So I think that would help us going forward. I'll bring Amelia in and then.
So one of the things that we have really been focusing on is understanding what money buys. And I think one of the things that has become apparent in the system is that we focus on the amount of money that is being handed out rather than what is the thing that needs to be purchased and how much does that thing cost. So that's a piece of work we will continue to work on with finance colleagues to understand the real cost of support, but also the shortest line route to procuring that help. And one of the things that is very apparent in the system is that a small provider, whether that's a small school or very much in the early years space, they have their hands full doing the day job, and doing things like procurement is not the best way for them to be able to access that support. So that's one of the things we will be considering going forward, is making sure that the support is there, but not necessarily by getting them to procure it. It's about them being able to access it.
Paraphrase. So are you saying, yes, we're considering that as part of this, or would this scrutiny body adding some weight to the need for early help and support help the process?
So I think, as we indicated on slide 13, the analysis of demand pressures, what that means in practice is looking at where are children coming into their system because their needs are not being met. That will include children, for example, coming in for EHCPs at reception whose needs could have been met earlier. So that will be coming forward for scrutiny and decision.
Point you made that bit will be helpful. So I'll keep that as one of my recommendations going forward. Simon.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to echo what other people have said, but as Amelia alluded to, we put in early help with social care notifiers. Well, that's 2 days. And I think it's so important for socialisation of children and their parents from a very early age. And it needs to be a central government initiative and funding, but they don't need an initiative because we had it. All they need to do is reintroduce Sure Start.
So thank you. your comments, something else supporting my point, which is I think one that we'll make, and we'll double check that we got the recommendations in its full at first. Sure, do you want to come back?
I just wanted to add that one thing where we really need to invest in early years is the staff training around this central training, particularly special education and clinical coordinators. There was a very good government scheme which was providing the funding for the early years to qualify staff. Due to the lack of staff and lack of ability to release staff, that the uptake was incredibly low. There's a paper which was published as a result of the impact of that. But I just feel that part of the things that the support for the early years is to look at that funding and how that would be enable this to happen. We have qualified centres in the early years, we can help and support the children, and hopefully that will not be leading into another increase of leave students.
And that's exactly the rationale behind what I say, but also there's a point, and forgive me for just the neurodiversity, diversity as well, and issues like that parents are very often identifying in a young person, a baby or toddler, that then there's no signposting to support them until they get so it's those sorts of points which I'm just making in relation to that. Are there any others? So we're on to page 59 of our. So just a question for me, the transform is linked to is that linked to connect in as far as the way it's going? And the reason I'm using that point is just another of my old complaints, but it's really exciting to see so many different services in that circle there. But are we comfortable with the data necessary? The sharing of data and information is robust enough to meet our expectation? Because too often, child A on the NHS is called something different on the school system, is called something different on the police system. I'm just using that as an example, but so are we comfortable that we have this single denominator in place or yes?
So there's some national work looking at single child identifier. I think the situation in Somerset is that the team has some strong ways of working in place in order to achieve consistent child record matching. So I think that's an area where we do have good practice, and we are talking to the government about it.
But I asked then that we don't recommend is we flag our concern for data and make sure that we're at the forefront of everything in relation to the indicators for young person. Thank you. No other question, you can move on.
So in relation to access to the right support and provision, you will be aware that Somerset at one point was one of the highest excluding areas in the country. We're pleased to say that that's now on a downward trajectory, but there's still a long way to go. And we've had a lot of support from school-based colleagues around thinking around our policy, which will be coming forward for further decision making in the coming year. And as we said, we will be looking at broader the role of people with lower units and the role that they can play. Centre units, I'm happy to touch on that again. We've touched on it already. Change in mainstream is about what's available in the classroom, what the curriculum looks like, teaching and classroom practice, and making sure that we know that the support is available to workforce schools who wish to improve. The delivery of education healthcare plans, it's a very difficult system to manage. It's a system that results in a lot of conflict, but there are improvements in practice that we will be pursuing to do the best that we can within what is given to us. And we are committed as well to looking at funding. Swavik's obviously already touched on this, and so both how we fund, how much we fund, who we fund, and how we implement that, because one of the things that we have teams working very hard on is reducing those providers in schools who are not getting paid. But that's about transactions being efficient, and our implementation being swift.
I mean, just a quick point for me. You made reference to one of our favourite subjects here is the HCPs. It's there, so I'll read you the question. I think I know the answer, but I'll do the question. So some council are receiving a high number of complaints linked to our process around SEND and EHCPs. what and how are we incorporating the lessons learned from these complaints in this policy? And will it mean less complaints?
And I believe we have an item on the board agenda to look at complaints generally. We have brought in some additional external capacity from a very experienced manager to look at our practice around tribunals complaints. We are requesting this to support this plan as investment to create a dedicated complaints manager. So we've created a dedicated team for the first time. It's clear that tribunals alone is a full job, and we need an additional individual to support complaints, simply because the volume of the complexity of each of those. The manager that we have brought in has identified a number of areas where we can improve practice that are already being implemented. We have instituted a number of improvements over the course of the past few months around complaints, but that's raising, more learning, more things for us to do. So this is not a short exercise. But I'm also pleased that we are regularly meeting with the local government assistant ombudsman from the local government social care ombudsman office. In her view, she is expecting to see some significant changes by spring 2026. So that's the timetable that we're working towards.
I was also thinking about that as I've been working through this meeting with the team moving through. I'm actually quite pleased to see that. I think that there's something about we need to deal with complaints more speedily, but we need to be preventing them in the first place. And so all the learning from the LGSC I'm seeing is around changing our processes and so that we actually avoid it. And that's you might get one, you might get a level 1 complaint, but when I get really upset when you get level 2 and then it goes to the longest one because that means we're not addressing something unless somebody's got it in their judgment. Somebody really good, that's fine. But if we're not changing our processes and learning from our complaints, it's going to be in trouble. So this is what I'm seeing in here. That's my hope. This will actually work and say with all the things we've been identified.
Really interested by the point, but the reason I'm making the point out loud to get here is because, and forgive me, I'm getting parents make contact with me saying it looks like some of us at council are more willing to pay the fine and sort out the education earlier. That's what we need to change. That shouldn't be happening. And I know that's something we are striving to do, but if I didn't mention it, then the people that are being chased people would say you never mentioned it. So.
And I think you touched on, there is improvements we can make to the way that we manage complaints in tribunals. We're making those, but fundamentally is about understanding why are parents complaining, and to the most serious concern is that the child hasn't got the educational provision that they need, and that's why the ombudsman will find us. Obviously, we're having a conversation now about creating SEND units, about improving how we manage alternative provision to make sure that children can go to school and that we can afford for them to do so. So that's all part of the big picture.
Thank you.
While on the slide, I think that summarizes what we've just been discussing. What I would just draw your attention to, sorry, on that slide in terms of scrutiny, is that the section 19 policy and procedure we'd be expecting to bring to this committee, the SEND capital programme we've touched on, and the SEND funding framework. So all of those we would expect to come back to scrutiny to consider before taking for executive decision. SEND units, I'm very happy to take any questions on that. The flexible education is being supported. Any questions?
So I think Simon, this is so the SEND units, so I don't go back one. I think it's an important point here. So this is the bit that Simon and Pauline was going to come in on in relation to the stars are, it looks like where there will be and etc. And so my question was going to be similar. The east looks a little bare, and then when there's still a lot of travelling here, but I think you covered that point really by saying that if you want to reiterate it, that's why I think when I'm bringing in members.
So there is absolutely a need in Broome, but we're having active conversations in relation to that town and the east generally. There are a number of stars that are on the map, but that are already in the pipeline pending further decision. So we would expect that to expand, but those are the ones that are confirmed at this point in time.
See, Sue, you put your hand up to becoming.
Hi, thank you, Chair. I was a bit late pressing the button, so probably referring more to the EHCP conversation. Something that underpins many of the conversations that are had at sort of appeals and tribunals, and also in school, is around parental choice and the impact that parental choice, in some cases, despite very, very good, solid professional advice, can put a spanner in even the best works. And I think that is something that I would urge locally, nationally, that should be looked at, because whilst parents do have, obviously, a lot to do with what happens for their children, unfortunately, we cannot assume that all parents will act in the best interest of children. And there is an increasing basket of evidence that suggests that some parents know how to game the system, do not bring their best behaviour to the table, and sometimes make irrational decisions. And I think that can be quite impactful. Well, I know that can be quite impactful when you are trying to look after the child. And I don't know quite where the place is for it, but it definitely is something that has a day-to-day impact on how life is.
Thank you, Sue. I've got just a point that I'd like to make now in relation to these SEND units, and there's a concern I have that young people's issues, problems, disabilities, diversities will be highlighted if there's a special spit in the corner of a school that they're not necessarily, so that they're taking in now. So I'd like some reassurance that it's, and I think you made the point earlier, that it's more a matter of how quickly we can get a young person to fully thrive in this everyday school placement than it is now. And it's just a concern that I have that, the young people, a bit like with our children looked after, one of the things we try very hard not to do is to make them different in any way so that they go forward. So can you reassure me that this is more a matter of a way to make their education better and than them to go somewhere else, please?
This sort of gets to the heart of inclusion, doesn't it? I think when it works, and if you've never been to Brookside, if you get the opportunity, then I would take it. One of the things we're seeing across the system is that, and I spend a lot of time talking to parents myself, is they say, I wanted my child to go to their local school, but it just wasn't, it just broke down. And that they're going to very, very, very lengths to secure a special school place. And we have a lot of children who need a quieter classroom. They need fewer children in that space. They need a different curriculum, they need a different approach to that teaching. We're going to have to learn as we go, and it's going to have to be child focused and look at the needs in that community and what those children are like, why education is not working for them. And we'll have to look at secondary differently, because the issues that are rising in secondary are not the same, and a secondary school is not like a primary school in some important respects. So there's still more thinking to be done, but certainly having listened to parents, having listened to schools, we do have a lot of empty space in the county. The feedback we're getting is it is certainly worth trying. It's in line with the government's direction, but this is something positive we can do, and it does reflect what parents and schools are telling us.
Thank you. I've got Heather, Schwarwick and Andy. So Heather.
Thank you. I was just going to say, I was trying to match the slide with what I've been talking about from BBC Sunset this morning in terms of different places where SEN units are. And I think it just might be helpful for certain presentations, and maybe a couple of versions of one which says where our current provision is in all of its glory. So where our beautiful secondary special schools are, like your own slide, and also some of the bases and resource units we currently have, and then kind of overlay on where the new ones will be, because it is a little bit confusing. Just to and I realise it moves around a lot. So we've got the ones we know are going to open in the first tranche, say September. The few are going to be opening in 3 more before the end of the academic year, And then, of course, it will change over time, because we're doing feasibility studies on 110, so of these, we're seeing units. But I think just map that landscape, so you can have more than one, it'd be really helpful.
Thank you, Robert.
Just want to remind members of that one, the first meeting which I attended was in December, that where the presentation was prepared, and we was looking at the analysis of the particularly primary schools where the numbers declined. So the initial analysis and where the schools were positioned was based on the capacity within those schools. And I think that's kind of what was the first initial thing, and then obviously we thought about extending this. Maybe that's the reason why some of the pictures the way it looks now. I believe that opening SEND provisions within mainstream schools is a great idea. It's a very forward-thinking idea, and particularly they develop the expertise within mainstream schools. And there is no over reliance on the special schools. I think they're very important thing is how that's managed. So we talked about the staff which we talked about this. I also feel that the risk which we have surrounding parents and their understanding of the function of this basis. And this is where we need to be incredibly good with local offer and what the descriptors of the schools are within their local offer and sign parents into it. And potentially maybe working further with I know that works already ongoing, but working further with the Parents and Parents Forum and see how the information is shared, how the consultations happen with the parents. Are we giving the parents sufficient amount of information about what that looks like? Talking about some of the success stories as well. The Brookside is one of those success stories. Also, one of you can ask about the quality of this teachers' experiences of those centres. Special schools are involved with this. I personally went to a number of the settings when we looked at the environment, looked at is it appropriate, because everybody is idea is slightly different. The key goal of this is to define the provision and which level of needs this school can meet. That's the key of this. Because we can't throw all the children in one place because that will not be working. Once that's really defined and it's happening, and then it can be done within the conjunction with the local authority, with the analysis of the needs. That will be absolutely the most kind of powerful things, and that will lead to the success of those centers. Yes, the first channel will be a learning and refinement of this. That's clear from the show.
Thank you for that. I'm just, I've got Andy and then Francis, more thoughts.
I think this slide sort of helps a little bit easier to explore on the previous slide, to be quite honest. I mean, there are two new units going into West Somerset, or Wellington and West Somerset. So you're looking at between 12 and 16 pupils, those two units. I'm just wondering how many pupils we've actually got in that area that require places such as that. I'm guessing it's probably a few more of the places that we've got, so they're still going to have to travel out of their area that we're trying to keep them within. So going back to my original question, future tranches of the money coming through, future schools being empty, hopefully we can get a few more in so that we can eventually have places in all areas of the county for all the children that require it. And that's what I was trying to say. Not that it's a bad thing, and I'm very appreciative of the places that we have got. I'm just very concerned that there are still children who would rather go to a local school, have a place like that, but they're not going together.
I thank you for the clarification. I think you clarified that point, and that this is the starting point. Yeah, it looks like that's one of the things that we could get the map with some existing places there as well, so that we can have that. You want to come back?
Just very quickly, one of the things, because we're concerned about children who don't have places, the programme, as we get further approvals, we're not going to wait till September 26. We will be looking at opening units where possible through the course of the activity.
Nice.
Just briefly to say that there's a list of buildings. That's opening in September. That is absolutely about the children not having to travel a very, very long way. And actually going on being part of their community, which is quite a nice developing community. It's absolutely
we do not want to exclude people from it, and that is what it's like, but taking, I mean, I'm aware that there are discussions about other provision, because of course this is.
Thank you. Thank you. Just a quick point from me there, because so it's around funding. So we're creating these hubs, and we're talking about capital funding just now. So are we comfortable that we have the capital funding in place to be able to do it? And if not, where is the gap coming from?
So there's quite a significant capital allocation. What was agreed is in the region of 1.5 million. This is a very, very low cost way to provide special school places. Considerably cheaper than building, because we do have a lot of schools that have empty space because of our declining birth rate. So in many ways, it serves two purposes, because building potentially provides a place for a child who otherwise would have to travel a very, very long way or not have a place. But also for some schools, it may well keep a rural school open that otherwise is at risk of closure, which is the last thing we want to see. So potential benefit.
Nick, just to be clear, so I'm right to the total you brought up at the beginning with the money that's needed now, we were going to move it from one place to another. That's just the cap. There's no additional capital funding needed in this, or was, am I wrong in that?
Yeah. In the table, which is on the slide of total investment expenditure and funding source, there was an existing capital allocation in there. There was no new.
That's a bit I wanted to consider. There's no new funding required, but otherwise. Okay, Simon, then I'd to move on.
Yeah, just quickly, I think what this map shows, and it would help get an overlay of existing areas, is that you've chosen these SEND units not really from where the greatest need is, but where there's available space. That's what it appears to me, because if I was Bridgewater and Taunton, obviously have high levels of deprivation, but I'd have a unit in Chard, not two in a quick term. You'd have one in Shepton, I think Glastonbury, we've got areas of deprivation. Froome obviously have got areas of deprivation, and it seems to me at the moment we've been chosen by where the availability is rather than where the need is necessary.
Before we enter into the top chunks with deprivation, etc., let's go, Kev. Yes, I accept your comment, and I think one of the points that, and I don't wish to put words in Amelia's mouth, that she made was this is the start.
Yes.
Of a process, and it's important to remember that. So I don't really care. I'm just conscious that we can start having a my pot bigger than your pot, which is the last place we need to be going down at the moment. So okay, so I've just got and I'm just to explain. I don't. People keep leaving the room. I want us to be quiet for as long as possible. So just if you could bear in mind with your responses. Thank you.
I think on the next slide, we have touched on flexible education. Just to clarify for colleagues, so they understand what this represents. This is a concept that we're kind of using to shape our thinking, which is just the principal concept, which is we should have the ambition that any child who has come out of education should be supported to get back into it. We know that there are a lot of children, really quite significant numbers, who are not attending school now, or there's thousands of children in that space. So this is a kind of an organising principle. We will be coming back with further analysis and decision making and proposals in the autumn. So we'll be expecting to come back to this committee in this regard. Effectively, the stages are to make sure that we have an offer at every stage, that if a child at stage 0 is in their bedroom, that there is the ability to support them to get out of their bedroom, that they need to be supported not in the presence of other children, that they're able to do so, that it's always about moving them back, ideally to their local mainstream school, wherever possible. And if that's not possible, making sure that there's provision that suits them at the other stages. In terms of preparing for the future, the preparation for adulthood is absolutely about collaboration with adult services, and Emily Fulbrook leads on this strand. I've already touched on supported employment. I won't dwell on that. It's an absolutely critical part of the puzzle, and we will be expecting to bring back some further analysis and proposals on that space. And I know, Francis, you've already mentioned housing. Building our relationship with housing. The focus is on understanding that progression for children who are currently providing support as that moves into adults, but there's a wider conversation that we are working on in that space. And on the next slide, to set that we are anticipating that will be for spring 26, review of those 16 arrangements. Just provided there on slide 21, just the very wide range of partners that we have in the supported employment space. This is something that Somerset does really well, and the potential is really boundless. So we'll be continuing to bang this drum and bringing that further.
Thank you. For me, the fact that we're considering transitions in this, I think it's super. It was one of the things that over the years we've come back to it. We don't seem to be dealing it in a very that's a transition from one school to another, but also transitioning into adulthood. And that to me, the fact that it's mentioned, there's some thought given to it, and we're actually is part of this process, really has to be commended because too often our young people are forgotten or just passed around. So transition, I welcome it. Thank you for that. Any questions, members?
And yeah, for my final step, please. This is really about enablers to enable us to develop, to deliver such an enormous program. And we are asking for support to create capacity in some key areas, some key posts, because the program really is quite significant. So just on the final slide then, we are continuing to embed the structural transformation. One of our key teams, our expanded virtual school, started on the 1st of April. They were 27 posts down this term. So there's still quite a lot of work in terms of recruitment and the teams getting to kind of full capacity. That is ongoing. But going forward, that we are asking for that support to expand our SEND oversight and program management capacity, just to make sure that we are able to deliver on these commitments, because we can't afford not to be able to do so.
General questions, and I'll bring any of the members into this. I welcome the fact that you've acknowledged workforce and the needs of that. So one of the questions I've written down is, does the existing workforce have the capacity and skill to deliver these proposals? But then more to the point, I've also gone on and said that how is staff's well-being and support being prioritised?
I have to be, really transparent. This has been a really tough term, because the team is managing a really enormous amount of change. But they are doing an absolutely amazing job. I think they're going to, like many of our school-based staff, they'll be staggering a bit to the finish line. And while we do obviously work over the summer, it is a bit of a later period. But what I would say is that I've been very encouraged by the fact that the overall plan is something that does seem to be galvanizing people, including some of the staff who've been at the organisation for a very long time, because they can see that the direction of travel is going to bear fruit and that their hard labours are not going to be wasted. They are all generating that outcome. So we can't sugarcoat the fact that the work is tough. There's a lot to do. The demand is high, and some teams we said have been very low in capacity because they're recruiting. But I'm confident that as we get into autumn term, as we get through into spring, we'll really start to see the benefits and hopefully go out as well.
So the reason I say that is because obviously with the development of this paper that's come to us, and also the fact all the bits around it, there's been lots of people putting lots of time. So first of all, I know from the committee will support me in thanking all of those that have been going above and beyond. But we also need to recognise the fact that the council has a duty of care to all our employees. And that's one of the points. I'm saying that out loud because I think that's one of the recommendations we'd like to make sure that executive hear from us, is the fact that we are concerned with for our staff, that they're getting the support they need, but also that we thank them for what they're doing.
Before we close, can I just take an opportunity? We do have some colleagues. We have got some colleagues online who have worked absolutely tirelessly to produce this really quite staggering amount of work. So I'd just like to recognise Andrew Beard, Andrew Hedges and Debbie Middleton, who have put in countless hours getting it to this point.
didn't want to go naming people because we're always going to miss someone. Thank you, and I acknowledge that. And I'm just going to go away from members. I've got one more point, and that's my list crossed off. Right. Sad that I am. People too made, I think it was 30 recommendations. And you've been going, I've seen the numbers have been flying around. So have we covered all of their recommendations? And if not, what have we missed?
Every single recommendation is in the send action plan. I can't hand on heart say that every single one has made it through into the presentation. We've had to check that, but I can assure you that every single recommendation is in the detailed plan.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks, Chair. A couple of things, if I may. So just on that last slide, we have to go back to it for mine. DFP delivery, and we link the enabling work programs to a number of recommendations. A couple of them are noted in Appendix 4, where you're allocating investment to deliver whatever it is that recommendation says. I appreciate, I think that's 1 in 7 are specifically referenced as recommendations that require extra investment. And I recognise that perhaps 2 and 3 won't require additional investment, but I do question recommendation 30, which says about building capacity for, what is it, a support team role or something within the team, and there's no fund, there's no direct investment for that. Perhaps that can be detailed somewhere else. Yeah, perhaps that one. I've got other questions about the overall article.
So the recommendations that the period of time that people too were with the service was earlier in the year. It was prior to the completion of the reorganisation. So recommendation 30 was dealt with as part of the reorganisation. So that action was completed before this plan.
And if I may ask, if anything like that's happened in the meantime, it would be good for that to be shown or made reference to somewhere in a document. We don't know that, but we do now. And a couple of other things I made just would generally, is this the right time to do that? So recommendations, objectives, great. I think one of the things that is missing for me, and perhaps the chair will pick this up in the recommendations in more detail, is timelines for delivery and target dates for some of these. Particularly, I have mentioned obviously the recruitment for head of send, and that's obviously without playing a integral part to the success of what's being required here. So actually having a clear timeline for delivery, I think, is probably a top priority, and us being on top of that. And there are a number of other things. All the objectives, in my view, should have timeline for delivery and target dates, because it is very ambitious and it's going to save a lot of money. So we need to be, we need to be accountable and really hold everyone, to it really. And I'm sure no doubt we'll do that, but I think we need to be really robust in that.
I think when you got that, let me come back. So I'm pleased to say that Scott has been diligently recording our recommendations as we go along, and you would have heard me express a concern that the overview of this and scrutiny is big enough to need something different. As a council, is one of the main recommendations that we're going to put forward to executive, and I think executive agree with that. And I would hope the fact that you mentioned timelines is really valid, because that's one of the things. But I didn't want to start shackling people to because I think so when if the executive agreed as of members, then I think that's one of the first things that we would be looking to make sure that we have the timelines in place. Because you're right, I hate to use the KPI thing, but we need to be holding the service to account in a robust way, and that will include a timeline. And this councillor.
Chair, I just want to make the point that we don't have the white paper yet, and so there may be some flex there depending on what's in white paper.
It's really just hypothetically, one may have heard that sends units, maybe one of the proposals that comes forward in the white paper. But again, we're preempting lots of ifs and buts and maybes. Meetings will come back.
So a new point, Councillor, about the plan. This is a high level summary of the programme. There is a very, very detailed action plan that breaks down to individual milestones with individual officer names next, but it's very granular. It's at operational level. too granular for, for these papers. But there's a huge amount of detail that sits behind this. That would be helpful to share with colleagues. I'm sure that we can do that if people want to side of it, but it's working on.
Think that, would you stop sharing, because I think that what we can do, Scott will put up recommendations and actions that I think we've got so far that we could just quickly run through just to confirm if, I know that the meeting is being recorded and we'll be able to make sure that the minutes reflect things, but I'm just conscious the timeline between now and executive is quite short, and we will be in a position to be able to make some recommendations. So, you have to go run through those, because I'm just conscious my dyslexic guys will miss them.
Certainly, and again, hopefully we should now be showing on the screen. This is hopefully capturing the various recommendations which have been identified through the debate at this meeting. You know, it's clearly said there that the chair is happy to propose what are 5 recommendations, and we will need a seconder for those. So recommendation 1, that the current SEND strategy and its associated action plan are updated to reflect the proposed deficit management plan. The updated strategy to be scrutinised by this committee prior to this being finalised. Recommendation 2, recommend that the executive undertakes collective lobbying of government with the LGA to secure increases in dedicated schools grant to meet our projected needs, and a commitment from the Secretary of State to review the existing DSU funding levels so that it provides sufficient levels of annual funding. Recommendation 3, that the executive establish a member-led programme management board to maintain oversight and management on the delivery of the proposed deficit management plan, together with this committee establishing its own oversight of the delivery of the plan. Again, drawing on Councillor Rodriguez's point, specific attention is drawn to the need for an early focus on the timelines for delivery and clarity on accountability. Recommendation 4, that the executive support and provide additional resources for more early help support and intervention measures. Recommendation 5, that the executive provide assurance that data sharing between partners to deliver the services and support is robust and resilient. It's just useful then just to note the actions that have been identified also through the debate today. Again, officers would take away. Together we also have some reassurance bringing really then for the committee 1, first of all, to identify a seconder for those, or if it's happy with those, or if there are amendments to those proposed recommendations, or if any of the committee would like any further advice in relation to those community officers present.
Thank you. And so we first of all with recommendations they are, is there anything else that we missed, or at any point we would be able to feed when this goes to executive, any member of council will be able to attend the executive and feed in. I think the work we've done today has been amazing, and thank you all for it's time well spent, because we need to make this point as loud as possible. This is important to council for so many different reasons. I've just got my vice chair has offered to second the proposal, but members, any other points or comments, or even officers that will submit this or anything like that to add? Yes.
No further questions really. It's just to note that recommendation 24, the P2 recommendations, does say to review and update the SEND strategy, just to say it's covered in the recommendation.
Thank you. So I'll do it for, sorry.
So my only slight concern with one of those recommendations is we are asking for additional resources as part of the request for funding for the DMP. I'm not sure how we can request for additional resources without that quantified. But
I think one of the point was that we were asking for more funds to meet our current spending level of sufficiency. Was that?
I was also wondering, and this is my meeting, I'm here to answer questions, not pose things, but I think it was number 4. I think that's one that we fell over. There, so you two looking at things and I was looking at it. Number 4 is one where it talks about that calling on giving some additional support for the early years and early intervention. That is possibly added that I would wonder if that's going to be part of the business. It's normally the plan has to get anything extra without a business plan for this. So that's my concern on that one. I don't know if you've
Sorry,
thought-
I don't mean to say that, but just to be clear, this scrutiny committee can only make recommendations to executive. They can hear it and don't have to respond to it. They can also acknowledge it and put it into their decision making. That's the reason I work, because I fundamentally believe that we need to be doing more as early as possible, and all that's doing is
Underlining, so we just.
saying,
Other schools. Just for point of clarity, so the plan that's going for decision will, if agreed, put in a significant increase in the capacity of 19. So to some extent, that will be, an important step in that direction. So that's already part of the proposal. I think there is also a commitment to come back to look at demand measures generally. So I think there is an opportunity to consider that, but maybe it would be helpful just to tweak that to be clear on what those.
members that we do that, but just again, just to reiterate, so. Oh, sorry, this is the constitution and there you need coming out for a moment, and the constitution is clear that at the time of taking the decision maker, body or group need to be aware of as much information as possible and consider it. The recommendation is this scrutiny committee are just recommendations. It's not going to hold a position. However, I'm happy, I'm sure the committee will be happy. If we have to fine tune any of those recommendations, I think that they cover all the points that we've made and are robust enough. If it's going to cause any constitutional issues, members, I'm happy for you to. Are you happy for me and the vice chair to make any necessary changes and feed them back? Thank you. So that covers, make us bulletproof for now.
It's not our problem whether it's a business case or not. We need to say that it's important.
That's fine. Yeah, thank you. That's the point I was making. So everyone happy? So proposed by me, recommendation that's outlined, seconded by vice chair. Are all those in favour, please show. Is there any against? That's unanimous. Thank you very much, members, for your time. I think that's the end of our meeting. We acknowledge the actions. So,
We're closed.
very good. I didn't say meeting closed.
Thank you and your committee. This particular way of working on this single item agenda, as it has been extremely helpful for Heather and to me. I really hope that this is setting that high bar for scrutiny.
What has been extraordinarily helpful, set of slides and the explanations and the clarity of them. I think that has been quite extraordinarily helpful.
100%. They have to be, that would be in the slides. And it helps to just to be able to see it, read it, understand it as well. And I look forward, I'll do my best to be there when it goes to executive and check my calendar. Members, for those of you that were in the full council, I will now say meeting closed. No.
Thank you.